Incident Management and Preparedness Advisor for the 8th Coast Guard District located in New Orleans, Louisiana. Mr. Sam serves as the district's lead expert on Coast Guard operations and connectivity under the National Oil and Hazardous Substances Pollution Contingency Plan and the National Response Framework. He serves as the co-chair for Regions 6, 7, and 8 regional response teams and the regional chair for the Mexico-United States Joint Response Team. So without further ado, Mike Sam, please.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here. Happy New Year. And for those Crimson Tide fans, congratulations on yet another national championship. For the Dogs, well, next year. But what a great game it was. So I'm going to stand here because we have people participating remotely, and I got a timer going, so we're going to get going. I got 20 minutes to cover this overview of Coast Guard as it relates to oil spill preparedness. This is kind of an outline overview of the topics that I'm going to be covering, and as Monica said, please jot down any questions, comments, or concerns, and we can address those at the panel discussion or later. All right, brief overview about the U.S. Coast Guard, if you're not aware. I won't get into the fact that we are one of the 5 armed services of the United States. We are the smallest. But here's how we are broken down. We have our headquarters at Washington, D.C. We have 2 area commands, one located in Norfolk or Portsmouth, Virginia, the other one in Alameda, California. And then we have 9 districts, 9 Coast Guard districts. And of course, I represent the 8th district here in New Orleans. This big block within the central U.S. Also, you see on this slide that we have one National Strike Force Coordination Center that's really focused on coordinating. They are the Strike Force Coordination Center oversees the 3 strike teams, one out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, the Atlantic Strike Team, the Gulf Strike Team in Mobile, Alabama, and the Pacific Strike Team in Novato, California. So those are a special team listed in the National Contingency Plan. Those are available to support any federal on-scene coordinator in response to oil, hazardous substance, weapons of mass destruction, any type of event, anywhere within the U.S. And we've also assisted other countries upon request. So that's just an overview snapshot of what the Coast Guard looks like globally. Specifically here in the 8th District, we have a diverse, vast area of responsibility. And I say that because if you look at that overlay over here at the top, it does include all or parts of 26 states from border to border. So all the way from North Dakota down to Texas and offshore 200 miles to the extent of our exclusive economic zone and our maritime boundary line with Mexico. So that's a lot of territory. We have the term within the 8th District, it's rivers to rigs. 3 distinct areas of operation. You have the Brownwater River System. You have, and that's the nation's highway. There's a lot of cargo, as you can see by the bullet points up there. A lot of cargo moving through the waterways. You have, of course, the coastal community where shipping coming in and out to the refineries, containers, and so on and so forth. And then you have, somewhat unique in the Gulf of Mexico, you have the Outer Continental Shelf, all that exploration and production for natural gas and oil. So a lot of unique, complex entities within the 8th District. 2 of the nation's busiest ports, you can probably guess those, but I won't take offers. They are Houston and New Orleans. So those are the 2 top, but there are several others within the 8th District that are in that top 30 range. And the graphic at the bottom, that's just a little snapshot of the complexities of that offshore component with pipelines and structures. Okay, a little bit of breakdown. The work gets done at the captain of the port level within the Coast Guard for marine safety, and specifically for this audience, which is oil spill preparedness. So you have there 8 captain of the port zones throughout the Gulf of Mexico. 6 of those are within the 8th district. And I'll draw a little line here. Mobile, that's the boundary right there. Mobile over to the west is within the 8th district. And sector St. Petersburg and Key West, that's in the 7th Coast Guard district that's headquartered in Miami, Florida. So we do share the Gulf of Mexico with another Coast Guard district. And I'll talk about regional response team breakdown a little bit later. But that's where it's at. And we do have representation here from Captain of the Port Office. And let me just tell you, I'm going to focus on Captain of the Port and Federal On-Scene Coordinator because that is the topic of discussion. But I just want to let you know globally for the Coast Guard that the person in charge of that unit, be it a sector, like Sector New Orleans, or the Marine Safety Unit out of Homa, that they wear many hats. Captain of the Port, Federal On-Scene Coordinator, you've heard about probably. Others that you may not have heard about, equally important, is Federal Maritime Security Coordinator, Officer in Charge Marine Inspections, and of course they're the administrative head of their unit, either a sector commander or a commanding officer. So a lot of different hats depending on the specific roles, authorities, jurisdiction for any type of issue. So what are the national breakdown for oil spill and hazardous substances planning, preparedness, and response? It really is traced back to 2 documents, 2 laws. Clean Water Act, it has been updated by the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, and that was updated in August of 1990. And of course, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. Rolls off the tongue easier if you say CERCLA, or AKA the Superfund. So that covers hazardous substances. Those are the 2 breakdowns. So oil is oil, and hazardous substance is CERCLA. So those are the 2 national laws that govern the planning, preparedness, and response to any pollution incident within the U.S. And of course, those 2 laws are captured in regulation by the National Contingency Plan. And that is located in 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 300. 40 CFR, Part 300. That is your National Contingency Plan for all to see and view. We haven't always had a National Contingency Plan. The first one was signed by President Johnson in 1968, believe it or not. And that was before the establishment of the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency wasn't established until 1970. So we did have our first National Contingency Plan in 1968. It was not based on law. It was not a legislative process. It was just a plan, a coordination effort. And who was deemed in charge of that at that time? Barrett 48, you still here in the room? Okay, I'm going to call him out. It was, believe it or not, the Department of the Interior. So, but if you don't know about the Torrey Canyon, that was the first real super tanker, if you will. Went down, it grounded off of Cornwall, England in 1967, and various things happened to it. It eventually sank and discharged its entire cargo of crude oil, and it was quite a mess. It was unorganized response, and the U.S. said, we need to establish something. So that's where it all began. There were changes and a lot of updates to the National Contingency Plan and different national policy plans and procedures, different roles of agencies, updates to Clean Water Act, so on and so forth. But the watershed moment was really with the passage of the Oil Pollution Act in 1990. And that was really predicated, finally, Congress was moved to take action as a result of Exxon Valdez in March of 1989. And so that really caused them to redo the Clean Water Act. And the OPA 90, as it's commonly referred to, it covers and it mandated a lot of different things. Do not think that the 5 bullets that I've chosen to list are the only ones. Those are just 5 that I want to speak to very, very briefly. We had an oil spill liability trust fund, but it was very inadequate. So this fund was established, new parameters, a tax on oil coming into the country, and that was to build up a $1 billion fund, basically, so that we would be assured that if we didn't have a responsible party, or if the identified responsible party was unable or unwilling to take appropriate action, as outlined in the law, as outlined in the regulations, then the federal government could, without waiting for them, we could take appropriate action to mitigate any pollution incident. So that was the key thing. Talked about facility response plans and vessel response plans. A huge improvement was the mandate of double hulls for tank barges and tank ships within U.S. waters, and that extended out to 200 miles. So that was a large effort. Matter of fact, the double hull requirement wasn't official and final until the year 2015. It took a long time to outfit and build new ships and barges. And of course, before Open 90, the contingency planning process looked a lot different. Open 90 mandated establishment of area committees by Captain of the Port Zone, mandated area contingency plans, requirements to exercise, so on and so forth. So that was a key moment in the evolution of oil spill preparedness within the United States. If you look at the National Contingency Plan, it talks about a national response system, and that is broad. The system is vast, and it basically takes local, state, federal, industry. There's a lot of different components that make up the national response system. And it is a system that, in theory, everyone knows what the requirements are by law, the implementing regulations. You're involved to the extent that you need to be involved in the planning and exercising. And if you're in industry, if you're exploring, producing oil or shipping, then there are requirements that you need to meet. So all of that is packaged into what is the national response system. There's 15 primary federal agencies that I'll get to here shortly that make up the bulk of that and make up the national response team. But first, we hear a lot about, I received the NRC report, National Response Center. That's 1-800-424-8802. That's the one call, that's all, not to be confused with Morris Bart here locally. But that is the one call that people make to report any oil hazardous substance incident, or you can actually talk about security and other reports as well. But focusing on pollution, that is located at Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. That's the Coast Guard's contribution to that system, if you will. So it's not a Coast Guard entity. It belongs to the National Response Team. The Coast Guard houses it and staffs it with a blend of active duty and civilian employees. And they're weaning off the active duty side. It will be a full civilian cadre of people within the next couple of years. But they're 24/7. They make the report, they look at their global map, and they figure out which Captain of the Port Zone it is in, whether it is Coast Guard or if it's Environmental Protection Agency, and then they push that information out. So that is the inputs and outputs. That's kind of what I talked about earlier, area committees, state governments. I mean, it's the national response system involves all of us. This is a good graph. It comes out of the National Contingency Plan, and it talks about what is the flow chart. How does an incident flow from notification, something happens, and then where does it go from there? So as we advertise, you call the National Response Center, and then they ship it out to the pre-designated on-scene coordinator, and then from there, you do the initial assessment. Is federal action needed, warranted? If the responsible party is cleaning it up, taking appropriate action, it would be more of a standoff monitor situation. If the feds need to be more involved, then we will be more involved. but it doesn't mandate that the lead federal agency, be it the Coast Guard or the EPA, must respond and be present throughout each and every cleanup that occurs throughout the U.S. There's some flexibility there depending on the specifics of the incident. Here's a very, very key thing. Natural resource trustees. That is a vital part of the entire process. And as we are here, right here, at the Department of the Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife facility, they are a designated natural resource trustee, as is the Department of Commerce National Marine Fisheries Service. So they are in charge of different species. They maintain, manage that list of federally listed threatened or endangered species, critical habitat. They are part of the conversation often when you have a response to a pollution incident. And then, of course, if as needed, it comes down to federal, once a determination is made about federal response required, then this is also discussed in the National Contingency Plan. We agree within the U.S. that we're going to use the Incident Management System, okay? Incident Command System, ICS. That is what we're going to work on. And at its simplest component, it's comprised of the responsible party, the lead federal agency, be it Coast Guard or the EPA, and the state. And there can be more. It's not constricted to only 3, but those are the absolute minimum. And then you have access to special teams on the right, as I was talking about, strike teams, and there's many other teams listed in the National Contingency Plan. And you have support at your regional level, at the regional response teams, and on up to the national response teams, which I'll get to here momentarily. So those are the logos of the 15 federal agencies that make up the National Response Team. And for those of you that don't know, the National Response Team does not respond. To the contrary, they are in charge of overall national planning and preparedness policy and guidance. So that is the body. All are important, but there are some that I would advertise and tell you here today that are more important and more involved on a frequent basis. And those are, the National Response Team is led by the Environmental Protection Agency. They serve as the chair. The Coast Guard serves as the vice chair. And terms do matter, as you'll see later. Other agencies that are very key are the Department of the Interior. They have, I believe, 10 different bureaus that are involved, U.S. Fish and Wildlife being one. You've got the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which you will hear from later. You've got Bureau of Indian Affairs, and so on and so forth. There's several different bureaus, so the Department of the Interior plays a big role in the fact that they're a recognized natural resource trustee. Likewise, Department of Commerce, they have several different entities within them. NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they provide scientific support coordinators to the U.S. Coast Guard. So we have a long-standing 40-year history of working together. You have National Marine Fisheries Service that manages those waterborne species. So those 4 entities are involved, I would say, more often than not. But there are 15 federal agencies that do make up the National Response Team. All are important. Under the National Response Team, we have established regional response teams. And there again, they don't respond per se. They focus on taking the national policy guidance and taking a cut at that and improving it for regional applicability. So regional planning, preparedness, and providing assistance to federal on-scene coordinators during time of a spill, be it oil or hazardous substance. And that's the breakdown. So there are 13 regional response teams. Each one of those regions does produce and exercises on a regular basis their regional contingency plan. So There's one national contingency plan that is managed by the Environmental Protection Agency. They are the designated agency by the president to run that organization and those regulations. At the regional level, you have 13, and for the 8th Coast Guard District, if you look back at that, if you think back to that graphic earlier, we have 6, 7, and 8, and we have portions of 4, 3, and 5. So we have basically the whole Western Rivers watershed, Ohio, the Mississippi, Missouri, Arkansas River, all that inland waterways, that's all within the 8th District. So we have a lot. We have 6 of the 13 regional response teams that we are involved in. We have more of a leadership role in 3. Those are 6, 7, and 8. Key thing within the regional response teams are you have a standing team. That's in. All right. I'm going to wrap it up here. You have a standing team and an incident-specific team, depending on the situation. This here just shows you an overview of how it all works together. You have your National Contingency Plan, regional area contingency plans. That's where the work gets done and fed in by facility response plans, vessel response plans, state and other federal plans. All that filters into the area contingency planning process. And one thing that we have is international plans. We have a joint contingency plan with Mexico, our neighbor to the south. So that's how it all works. Not to be confused with the National Response Framework, which is over here as well. They can coexist. Regional contingency plan, I just want to put this one plug in, that there are regional contingency plans established. There are numerous area contingency plans developed and exercised, but in the inland zone, it's broken up that the EPA is the pre-designated federal on-scene coordinator within the inland zone, and the U.S. Coast Guard captain of the port that's assigned, they are the pre-designated federal on-scene coordinator for the coastal zone. Where that boundary is developed through the EPA and the Coast Guard and is listed in the regional contingency plan. It also oftentimes is followed up with a memorandum of agreement. But in the inland zone, you may not have an area contingency plan as you would see in a coastal area. Unless you have an identified area contingency plan, then the regional contingency plan serves as your area contingency plan. And the regional response team serves jointly as your area committee. That's a nuance that, unless you've done time within the Western Rivers, solely within the inland zone, you would not necessarily understand that. Those are just key components that make up the area contingency plan. That's not the only things. There's a lot in there. Those are just 7 of the more important things, I would say. And that comes from law. I talked about our Mexis plan, and we're currently working on an update to our Mexis Gulf Annex. Some Deepwater Horizon improvements. I would say area contingency plans, been a huge thing. The establishment of, we have updated our contingency plans post-Macondo Deepwater Horizon. We started that venture in 2013, and that's an ongoing process. So there's opportunities to get involved in that. And there's been major improvements in capabilities with cap and stack and cap and flow for those Macondo type incidents. Of course, we know that there's a lot of other pollution that can happen. It does have to be an uncontrolled well blowout. I'm standing here before you today as a result, I would hope to say, positive result of the Deepwater Horizon response. Each Coast Guard district got one of me, and we serve as the long-term continuity for this mission, if you will. All right. I'm just going to tell you that there is something called the Preparedness for Response Exercise Program that mandates how exercises, it doesn't mandate, there are guidelines. It is not regulation, it's not absolute, but I don't know of any industry component that does not adopt the PREP guidelines as their own. So it is based in the law and what the law calls for, but they are guidelines. Four agencies put that together: Coast Guard, EPA, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, and the Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Those four federal entities work collaboratively to develop and publish the PREP guidelines. Last edition is 2016. Mike Drew is going to talk about Mexico Gulf exercise. That's just a snapshot. And that is our future schedule coming up in March of 2018 and following through to another full-scale exercise in 2021 based out of Corpus Christi, Texas. There is an opportunity to incorporate science, and you heard Gomery mentioned. Go Moses Conference is going to be in New Orleans in February. We're working on different things within Regional Response Team 6, such as in-situ burn policy. We're looking at uncontrolled well blowouts and subsea dispersant injection protocols. We've been doing those exercises for several years. And you may not be able to see that clearly, but everyone that attends, I believe, is going to get a copy of this. So there are plenty of opportunities to come to participate, to collaborate in pollution planning and preparedness. Some are at the area committee level, some are at the regional level, some are conferences, but there's a lot of opportunity. So if you have any interest at all, please seek me out. I can put you in contact with the appropriate captain of the port, or maybe it's more appropriate for you and your agency to connect at the regional level.